This meeting is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to the 46th episode of Seoul's 2022 Year of the Ecological Garden webinar series. And thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Christine Earnshaw and I'm the Special Projects Lead with Seoul. I live in Ottawa, the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, who have lived in this region for millennia and have much to share about ecological approaches to land stewardship. For today's presentation, I'm pleased to introduce Daniel Buckles, a community animator, advocate, adjunct professor at Carleton University, and writer. He'll be speaking today on a community project that involved depaving a street in Ottawa and turning the site into a pollinator garden and community forest. Daniel's presentation will be approximately 20 minutes, and there'll be time for question and answer following the presentation. As the host of today's session, I will moderate the questions. If anyone has one, please write it in the chat, or following the discussion or presentation, you can unmute and ask your question directly. Finally, I'd like to mention that this webinar series and much of Seoul's work is made possible by the generous and ongoing support of Gaia College, Canada's leading college for professional development and diploma courses in organic land care. So with that, let's begin, and over to you, Daniel.
Well, thank you, Christine, and thanks to Seoul for inviting me to share a community experience under the Right to Garden theme of Seoul's Year of the Ecological Garden series. My main message today, in addition to sharing the beauty of a greener green space in my community, is that we can and we must make better use of public lands to protect ecological functions in urban areas and provide access to food and shelter options for animals and humans alike. Local stewardship of public spaces, I also argue, is the most efficient and effective way to achieve this public good. As Christine said, my name is Daniel Buckles. I live in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And prior to my recent retirement, I spent 30 years working as an anthropologist, doing and publishing research on the economic and social aspects of ecological agriculture in developing countries, Bangladesh, Honduras, Mexico, India, among other places. Surprisingly, that work helped me when I became active in efforts to protect trees and promote plant diversity in my neighborhood. It gave me the confidence needed to combine careful research with community engagement. The general strategy my presentation will outline. It all began with a protest. 12 years ago, this healthy bur oak was threatened and eventually cut down a few blocks from where I live. You can see the arborist up there starting the work. The tree predated Confederation in Canada and was one of only a handful of old growth trees remaining in a neighborhood experiencing intense urban infill. We lost the battle, but the community woke up to the significance of the problem, which is a key step in raising awareness and mobilizing people to fight for greener neighborhoods and greener green space. My first lesson from this was, don't underestimate the value and staying power of a good fight. What came after was a decade of community activism around trees with a strong focus on promoting biodiversity and tree protection on private property, where some 60% of Ottawa's trees are located. Many people, myself included, suddenly began to notice what we have and to value and celebrate what trees bring to communities and what municipal authorities need to do to protect and enhance trees on private property. This is an example of the community outreach organized to support that growing awareness. The image on the left shows the location and diversity of tree species, or lack thereof, in the neighborhood. And that was used to support the identification of plantable spots and encourage planting of species that are missing from the landscape. There's a lovely citizen science methodology called neighborhoods, which was used to do the mapping. The image on the right shows the financial benefits of these same mapped trees based on the methods underlying iTree, a USDA tool. While economic value is not that impressive when only one tree is considered, a collection of trees does show a meaningful financial benefit to the people affected, in this case, 36 homes in a 3-block radius. Both these pieces of research and outreach raised awareness and helped people become engaged in follow-up actions. This image shows the surface temperature of a section of Ottawa, which includes the treed neighborhood of Champlain Park, where I am and that I'll be talking about more, which is marked with a circle or squarish shape in red. Paved over neighborhoods on the right side of the image. I hope the photos don't, or the pictures of people don't block it out entirely, but you can see on the right side that surface temperatures on the same day were much, much higher. This highlights the problem of inequity with respect to the benefits of urban canopy, urban green space, and urban gardening. It matters to health, food security, and general well-being whether or not it's possible to retain tree canopy and access green spaces. Not everyone in every neighborhood can, and it is becoming increasingly difficult. We should be under no illusion about how hard it is to retain or build an urban canopy where private property rights are king. No major city anywhere in North America has been able to stop or reverse the slow decline in urban canopy, despite stronger tree protection bylaws and other measures. In Ottawa, our neighborhood and people in many other mature neighborhoods with trees have for 10 years pressed the municipal government for better tree bylaws. I've become decidedly pessimistic about the big picture future of trees on private property and the efficacy of municipal tree protection bylaws. In a political and policy environment like the one in Ontario, private land development is virtually unstoppable. Achieving the overall 40% urban tree canopy target set in the new City of Ottawa official plan simply cannot happen if implementation relies mainly on private property. Private property rights almost always trump collective rights when it comes to general environmental or health and social costs due to tree loss. So where does that leave us and our engagement with local governments and other institutions in the urban environment? What are the opportunities and what role can communities play? My message, as I said earlier, is that we can and we must make better use of public lands to protect ecological functions in urban areas and provide access to food and shelter options. Public spaces are our most significant opportunity to pick up the pace of creating livable and inclusive cities of the future. That includes everything from public parks on the left, school properties in the middle, and street medians and streetscapes on the right side. Also rights of way such as hydro corridors and a whole range of underutilized or degraded fragments of public land scattered throughout Ottawa and many other cities. Local stewardship of public spaces is the most effective and efficient way to achieve this public good. That means making use of every strategy possible to make that happen. In Champlain Park, we started by asking the city councillor for our ward to close one block section of an underutilized street. He and various members of the community lobbied city officials for a year, finally getting permission to close the street temporarily using planters paid out of the councillor's budget. 7 planters provided local gardeners with a space to beautify the street which they continue to manage by rotating adoption of a planter among interested residents. When no serious complaints emerged, the city agreed to depave the street, even while it remained a roadway on official maps. More than 50 community members turned out to literally pick up a small square of pavement and cart it to a dump truck. The Enviro Center, an NGO dedicated to providing people with practical solutions to environmental problems, lent a hand. The depaving initiative created a space for community members to channel their energy, ideas, and passion for plants. We benefited from a degree of legal and operational ambiguity that allowed for a gradual transformation of a space over a period of 3 years. The City of Ottawa was at first uninterested in doing anything with the depaved section other than planting grass, which did not thrive. The roadway, however, bordered other public lands owned by the National Capital Commission. The community had a long history of passive permission from the NCC for volunteers to remove invasive plants, such as the buckthorn, from their land and to plant native species in their place. The arrangement, which was put in place through a land access permit signed by the community association every year, also allowed the association to extend insurance risk coverage for the volunteer activities. We use these relationships to start work on the boundary between the two public spaces, city roadway and the NCC forested area on the riverside. Clearing away some old chain link fencing, clearing out buckthorn, which you can see Chris doing on the left side, bringing in some soil and building a pollinator garden right on the edge between these two pieces of public land. The impact was immediate, beautifying what was an unsightly roadway and connecting the city park, which you can see in the background, to the NCC property. This became the centerpiece for community engagement, flying more or less under the radar of city officials and with no direct involvement from the NCC other than passive permission. It kind of straddled the line between community partnership with government bodies and guerrilla planting. While not really designed that way, it was the only way things could move forward in an environment where both municipal and federal bureaucracies are unwilling to provide budgets or dedicate staff to community stewardship of their land. From this base, though, we were able to quickly include other public spaces, such as this former gravel part of the roadside. You can see the park in the distance, and the NCC had moved their fence from the tree line on the right to where you see it in the photograph some years earlier in order to eliminate a parking area that they no longer wanted in the area, wanted to be available, leaving behind gravel where you see all those stakes and trees planted. We established a tiny forest in that space, about 135 trees and 24 different native species, using the Miyawaki method of high density and high diversity, the so-called tiny forest. It's trees of differing rooting behaviors and different heights at maturity. While the science is not there to say with any confidence what species go best together in this kind of setting, we have focused on bringing in missing native species and monitoring how they do. We're also taking a long-term perspective on care for the trees, protecting them from browsing rabbits and rodents with wire cages and coil stem protectors, and covering the ground around them. This fall, more than 500 bags of mainly maple and oak leaves were collected from the street just before the city would have come by to pick them up and distributed on the ground around the trees. We thought, why let this community resource leave the neighborhood? So we've made effective use of all of those leaves in these spaces to protect the ground. The establishment of the pollinator garden and launch of the tiny forests, both on the NCC lands bordering the city property, created confidence and demonstrated the capacity of the community to safely undertake a more ambitious rethinking of the depaved area. Still, we started from the NCC side where permissions were in place and gradually extended along the boundary between the two properties. Given the very poor soil conditions on the former roadside, we brought in soil and managed to get Hydro Ottawa to deliver large amounts of mulch from its regular tree trimming activities. That mulch would otherwise have been sent to landfill and involved a lot of trucking of material around before finding its final location. So we got it diverted from basically the catchment of our neighborhood to this area to incorporate in with the soil and gravel that was already there. We also created a lot of opportunities for volunteers to contribute in different ways and with different levels of effort. Student hours to do watering, people who just wanted to lend tools or lend their vehicle, others that wanted to do some hands-on planting. This was the result of that part of the work, 2 large terraces that are helping to push back the buckthorn on the right and connect the former road to the park on the left. It bridges the 2 spaces and extends the beauty of nature in a highly visible place where all community members get to see and appreciate what's happening. The roadway is right where the telephone poles are. The terraces created a very good planting environment for more native species, also planted densely, but we also dedicated some sections to other kinds of experiments. We established a demonstration Carolinian forest. It's made up of species of trees native to Eastern North America, but south of the Ottawa plant hardiness zone. This is an experiment in what is called assisted migration, moving near native species that are likely to naturally migrate slowly north as the region warms. So this may be the trees on the right, things like pawpaw and catalpa and many other Carolinian species may be in some ways the future forest of the Ottawa area. We also established a small food forest with American hazelnuts, a Macintosh apple tree, and a range of small fruit-bearing plants on one of these terraces. I'd like to offer 2 slides with some general points for discussion. I think it's fair to say that for a wide range of reasons, a large percentage of today's urban habitat is in a state of arrested development. It is highly affected by invasive species and does not contain native species that should be there. Public spaces offer significant scope for accelerating habitat improvement. Research and experience suggests that habitat improvement should involve a gentle approach, bringing in native species year to year and gradually pushing back invasive plants, rather than taking a clear-cutting kind of approach to green spaces. A general principle is to decrease exotics, bring in missing species that have been extirpated from nearby, and promote better dispersal of seed. From an institution perspective, social innovation kind of perspective, our experience suggests that indeed, governments can play a positive role by offering general oversight and passive permission to community stewardship, rather than trying to manage the process. Their own risk aversion and bureaucracies really do get in the way of effective stewardship. And that's why volunteers may need to kickstart the process, as we did. But we did so based on solid community support built up over quite a few years of informing people, recognizing, creating a variety of ways for people to contribute. All of this helped to build community support, buy-in to the initiative, and minimize the risk of blowback from city or the NCC government bodies. And finally, communities almost always have local expertise and capacities to plan, experiment, and monitor. What I think needs to be seen as kind of the right scale, being ambitious and highly visible, but careful not to overextend beyond their capacity. So these are a few general institutional, organizational kind of considerations, and the previous slide pointed to some practical planting considerations as well. Just so you know, in terms of building community support and whatnot, that the bench that you see there was financed by a family in the neighborhood that wanted to honor their grandparents who had grown up in that neighborhood. And we also have this sign that was just installed a few weeks ago explaining the history of the planting areas and is actually a remnant of that oak tree that I've referred to in my first slide that had been cut down in 2011. That part of that tree was converted to make this sign to celebrate the community efforts to restore native biodiversity. I'd like to stop there and invite Christine and others to make any questions.
Yeah, so with that, I would like to just invite people to put questions in the chat or just motion that you would like to ask a question directly. But Daniel, that was very informative, very interesting, and some of the terms, the idea and the proposed thought that some of these public spaces are in a state of arrested development, I find very interesting. And yeah, with that, I'd like to ask the first question, and that is really, you said under this model, it sort of worked well to have sort of passive involvement by government. They sort of know what's going on, but they've left it to the community. And obviously there has been very solid proposed ideas put forward, or they're confident that the expertise and the involvement of the community is going to result in something that they would approve of, in a sense. But in terms of that type of passive involvement and more community-led, how do you imagine in this particular context, like you said at the beginning, this was an opportunity for the community to really channel their energy into passion into this project where they could really be involved. You offered many different entry points to volunteer, but how would that sustain over time? So some of these spaces that require the ongoing stewardship, how do you ensure ongoing involvement by the communities around these spaces? And who is managing that process at this point, or coordinating that volunteer engagement in this particular project?
Well, I'm going to answer John Milton's question at the same time. I did mention it, but I'll repeat that there is a community association. So like many neighborhoods in Ottawa and probably in other cities as well, residents do organize themselves around in community associations. These are not-for-profit corporations often, with voluntary membership and collecting of membership fees. Not everybody in our neighborhood is necessarily a member, but everyone can be. And that association provides certain continuity to community initiatives. The work that I've described was presented to the association for formal approval. So prior to undertaking the various activities, the plans were outlined and presented to the community association for their review and formal approval, which simply, which involved a vote by the executive. And the value of that was it helped to extends the community association's insurance to the volunteers. So many communities, community associations have an insurance policy and for activities that it approves, and that process of submitting a proposal to the community association, having it reviewed, did two things. It provides continuity, and it also provided the insurance coverage that was needed by the NCC in order for the land access permit, which to be signed. That agreement, and the agreement is between the NCC and the community association, and the NCC will provide these land access permits. There are a number of neighborhoods in Ottawa that do have agreements with the NCC. It's not really difficult to put in place, but it does require a community association to sign on behalf of an organized group, and or some other body. I know that Just Food has signed land access permits on behalf of a community garden along Parkdale Avenue near where we are. And that community garden is not a community association. I'm not even sure if it's a legal entity. But the Just Food provides the legal entity that can enter into an agreement with the NCC. So the continuity is there from that source, and the agreement between the association and the NCC is such that basically the land access permit lists the kinds of things that can be done: plant trees, remove buckthorn or other invasives, maintain the trails. And that agreement is re-signed every year, and it provides the passive permission for the community to do those things within the bounds of that particular list of what's permitted. Final thing I'll mention on that constraint is from community associations are increasingly finding it difficult to get insurance, and there's a whole bunch of difficult things happening in the city of Ottawa that are creating more and more barriers for community associations in terms of the insurance for volunteer activities. But one of the things that we've done and the implications of that has been all of the work had to be done had to be done by hand. Pick and shovel. It would have literally taken I don't know, a day or so to do the digging that was required to create planting beds using a backhoe or something like that. But we couldn't hire a backhoe because of the insurance arrangements with the community association. So we had to dig it by hand, and we had some very energetic people that did that work. My favorite phrase from that is one of the people said, "It's cheaper than the gym."
Yeah. Yeah, I'll have fresh air too. Okay, someone, I'm gonna just invite, and is it
Anna?
Anna? Would you like to unmute or ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, hi, Daniel. And thank you for that talk. It was again very inspirational. You might remember you spoke to our group. I'm from Riverview Park,
Oh,
and
yes.
we have a Hydro One 5-kilometer corridor right adjacent to a buckthorn infested woods that was slated in the city plan to become, a one of these transition highways linking Leitrim and Walkley to the downtown area. That's not happened. We've opposed it. Our ex-councillor supported it. We've not. The current councillor is much more sympathetic. I wanted to bring up the issue of utility corridors, though, because you mentioned that you were pessimistic about the possibility of protecting trees on private properties. For the last 3 years, we've been trying to engage with Hydro One to actually do really two things. One is remove buckthorn and dog strangling vine that is invading that whole area, and two, to look at possibilities of introducing an urban meadow into that property and perhaps doing other things that the community would want. The answer, of course, from Hydro One has been, well, you need a secondary land use agreement. Hugely bureaucratic, unrealistic for little communities such as ours. We were able to find out that the City of Ottawa does have secondary land use agreements with Hydro One, but generally they're along pathways or they're really small areas. So I guess you talked a lot about the NCC and the agreements that you have with the NCC and with the City of Ottawa. We did manage after a 4-month period to get an agreement on City of Ottawa property next to the hospital link road, and we've built a beautiful new pollinator garden, which we invite you to visit in the spring when it's blooming. But my real question is, what are your thoughts about how do we deal with Hydro One? You know, these provincial institutions, so it's another level of government. We know that in Ottawa, there are about 200 kilometers of green spaces that is Hydro One owned. So do you have any thoughts, reflections that would kind of help us move things along that would not go that bureaucratic route of the, the secondary land use agreement? It's a long question. Sorry about that.
Well, no, the final part of the question is clear. What do you do about Hydro One? The provincial body that somehow has not found its way to the space where the NCC is, which is to have a fairly light process for allowing community stewardship of particular spaces that is, guided by a list of permitted activities, but doesn't require really close oversight. So Hydro One needs to get there somehow. I don't have any brilliant ideas, but I will throw out a couple of things just off the top of my head. One, of course, is to work with the member of provincial parliament for the area to enlist that person to connect with Hydro One and make a request for a secondary land use agreement if it's something that can be adjusted to a community level. A second is to use your councillor to try and get the city to bring your association under their agreement with the province. Again, defining the space precisely and defining the list of permitted activities. So, you've mentioned too, removing invasives and introducing species relevant to an urban meadow. So to use your connections with the counselor to try and do that. And I guess a third strategy, I can't say that I'm promoting it, but it's certainly an option, is a low profile guerrilla planting type of approach, which basically just picks away at little edges of the space and demonstrates the capacity of the community to effectively manage a space and does so within a reasonable kind of set of guidelines that are credible. So those are three possible actions that one can consider.
Okay, well, I'm going to go to another question. It came in, and it's someone wondering, Daniel, if you could speak to the extent of which education plays a role in the plaques or interpretive signs, community tours, sort of what you post on websites, maybe any community work bees. How much does that play a role in the project that you're speaking of?
Well, certainly community work bees have been quite helpful. We have the depaving initiative itself was a work bee. We worked a lot with student volunteers, people doing their student volunteer hours. There are rules, if you will, and ways to do that properly. So it's not super straightforward, but it worked pretty well. Actually, the students managed their own schedules with a web-based Excel spreadsheet where they self-managed their contributions to watering and weeding. And in terms, and we've done a lot of tours of the space over the years as well, although surprisingly, very few people from the neighborhood come to those tours. It's kind of like they take it for granted to some extent. You know, people will walk through the space. It's a highly visible area. I think that's one of the strengths of what we've done, is that, you know, it's highly visible. We paid a lot of attention to making it beautiful, keeping it beautiful, so that, you know, people didn't feel like it was anything was an eyesore. And they walk through the space to get to the river, to get out on their bikes, to use the park, whatever. And surprisingly did not participate a lot in the tours and other educational activities. Those seem to draw people from other parts of the city. And so I'd say education, the tours themselves played a role in showing others what could be done in their own neighborhoods. So inspiring other neighborhoods,
Yes.
more than actually creating support for the initiative in the community itself. That support came from the direct impact. It's beautiful. It's connected to the park. And so people simply came to appreciate the contribution that these garden spaces and the tree planting has had in their own lived experience within the neighborhood. Certainly lots of questions when people walking by, you know, the different volunteers that are there. The fellow who did a lot of the digging was there from, you know, 6:30 in the morning till 8 o'clock in the morning, doing his gym exercise and taking breaks to answer questions as people walking to work or whatever came by. So we did have some sign. We've had signs, a couple of signs that basically outline the diversity objectives in terms of what it is that we're trying to do with the space, making sure that they're bilingual as well, to avoid any to communicate broadly and avoid any complaint.
Yeah.
So those were some elements of the education that come to mind.
Well, but another side of it, when you mentioned the tiny forests, like, I do know another group that was awarded the Greener Green Space from Seoul's recognition program, and it's a tiny forest on Wolf Island. And what's so interesting in what you mentioned is the fact that it is an approach, it's a method to grow these forests, and the growth rate is much higher, and the trees are supposed to collaborate, and there's a lot of research potential there to just sort of monitor what the impact or how these trees are growing up together and what survives, what doesn't, the seed dispersal. Is there a way that you're going to involve community members, maybe even the school that's close by, in that type of research or monitoring, documentation, presentation to the community? Like, that's all such information that's not widely known. The ecology, how it's all working.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to share a spreadsheet just to show you that, we do keep track of, can you see the spreadsheet?
Yes, yes.
We keep track of the species and the number of individuals planted in each of the spaces, and mortality rates as well. I haven't actually explained anything about some of the other planting techniques that we used. We planted in mounds, for example. Hugelkultur is the European term for it. It's basically a compost pile made of rotting wood and rotting leaves and a bit of soil to create a growing medium for plants on very thin soils, because the riverside all along the Ottawa River is very, very thin, literally a few inches of soil. And at the beginning, we were trying to dig holes to plant trees. It would take an hour to dig a hole, very labor intensive. And so we came up with this idea of building the growing space literally on top of the existing soil, and using very small seedlings, just little things like this size, planted in those spaces, and which means that the tree finds its own way and establishes itself over time in these very thin soils. Doing that helped us introduce some new techniques as well. And so we're trying to keep track of what we're doing. Every year we produce reports on what's been successful, what hasn't, mortality rates, as I mentioned, etc. So that is, like I said, every community has people who have expertise, and in our community we have a retired botany professor from Ottawa U. We have a volunteer from Fletcher Wildlife Garden that has developed vast knowledge of wild native species of plants. We have people who have energy to manage trails and to create planting beds as well. And so all of those people can offer different resources and different levels of effort to a collective undertaking. It's, from a research perspective, it's going to be anecdotal information, but the documentation is thorough enough that specialists could make use of it in a general sense. They're not going to publish in a journal based on our experiments, but to build up experiential learning, it's quite relevant.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that's why it is relevant for other groups as well. So where can anybody go find more information about this Is there a website that you could add to the chat or just mention?
Yes, of course. Well, there is the website of the Community Association, but also there is a website that has a blog that has a descriptor of many of the different garden sites and the history as well. And I'm just putting that now in the chat.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very useful. Yeah, thanks for putting that in there. Well, that comes to the end of our time. We're closing off at the moment, but I guess what I'd like to say is thank you for joining us today. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. And thank you everyone who participated. This is, yeah, episode 46. There are a couple more. We're at the end of the month of November, which was the theme was about the right to garden. And yeah, we too, I like what you said right about the beginning, that we can and must be working in these public spaces. That's critical for our urban and fabric. So with that, we're moving into the month of December. We have a theme, and that is livelihoods in land care. So please join us next week at the same time and the week after that. And then we close off with this series and probably start again next year. So again, thank you very much for joining. This will be recorded. It was recorded and it will be on our website in the next couple of days.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye. Yeah, and Daniel, maybe you want to wait for, there's more in the chat too. Okay.
I can see a few some thank yous. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. So I'll be in touch again. So thanks a lot, Daniel.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye now.